Hi, I'm Jake Ray, and today on the Student Slant, we talk to Holly Zachariah of the Columbus Dispatch about storytelling and journalism.
So, journalism has always been a complicated and important business, but maybe never more so than today. We deal in facts and nonfiction and the truth, but we have a responsibility to tell stories and to take people places they've never been. And I always turn to the introduction to a book called The DC Comics Guide to Writing Comics. And this is what it says: Make me laugh, make me cry, tell me my place in the world. Lift me out of my skin and place me in another. Show me places I have never visited and carry me to the ends of time and space. Give my demons names and help me to confront them. Demonstrate for me possibilities I've never thought of and present me with heroes who will give me courage and hope. Ease my sorrows and increase my joy. Teach me compassion. Entertain and enchant and enlighten me. Tell me a story. And that's what we do. We tell stories. Holly Zachariah, career journalist at the Columbus Dispatch newspaper.
I'm Jake Ray.
I'm Zach Varda, and this is the Student Slant.
So, Holly, what you do with the Dispatch is you write very long form. You mentioned in the class we were just in that features may not be what you'd like them to be called, but you really go into people's emotions and give us a story that you just mentioned in that quote that you tell a story. You're a very good storyteller. But when you start out in journalism, you typically don't start out getting to tell these type of stories. So would you say when you started out writing stories that I guess a intro journalist would have wouldn't be huge news, do you think you went into it trying to tell the story that deeply and really writing the same way that you do now?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I look today at what I wrote even 5 years ago and I think, oh, please don't read that. Please, because we all have to get better every day at what we do, or we should stop doing what we're doing. So I was awful. I was terrible, and I might still be in some respects. But in terms of what you said about feature writing, we talked in the class about, some people think features means content. There's a certain kind of story you're writing. It's about certain things, lifestyle or health or those kinds of topics. And I believe, and a lot of people believe, and at the Dispatch we believe that features is a style of writing. It's storytelling, and we're very blessed that they let us do that there. But for young journalists, which is the point we're here for today, absolutely, you have to earn your stripes in any business, and journalism is no different. And you can't become a good or a great writer without the building blocks and the fundamentals underneath you. And you learn those on the streets. The very fundamentals of reporting and interviewing is what allows you to become a great writer. And so you write the traffic fatals and the briefs and the sewer plant stories and those kinds of things. And let's be frank, I still write traffic fatals and briefs and sewer plant stories. There's not that many of us anymore, and I write what needs to be written, and I cover the news, and then the little joys along the way, and what keeps us going is the good stuff, the big stories that we can take our time on.
Yeah, and you mentioned how you kind of have to learn your writing skills and build those skills to be able to be the type of writer that I think you are. And in class in the talk, you gave us 4 different examples that really had lessons behind them. And your 4 lessons were: be curious, do your homework, go out and find the story, and be comfortable in the uncomfortable. How long would you say it took you to learn these lessons and come up with those lessons that you could come into a class and tell young journalists, this is what you need to do to be a fantastic feature writer?
I can't say my aha moments, but I know that what helped me and what I tell young journalists that I mentor is that every moment is a teachable moment. And that sounds so cliche, but I sought out on a regular basis at every step of my career people who I thought could make me better, people who I could learn from. And I also learned what I didn't want to be and what I didn't want to do. And so over time, there are just certain things that became ingrained in me. And most of those lessons that we talked about in the class, as I mentioned, are none of those are original thoughts. I had great mentors. I still today have great mentors. And so when another journalist, I preach the gospel of Lane Gregory. Everybody who knows me knows that. Google her if you don't read her stuff, please. And, Lane Gregory, she's the go with them. You want to tell somebody's story? Don't interview them. Be them. Go where they're at. Meet them where they're at. Go along on their drive. Ride in the car with them. Don't say, I'll meet you there. Can I meet you at the office and we'll ride together? So those sorts of things. So it's really a matter of seeking out people who can help you be better.
The fourth one, being comfortable in the uncomfortable, made me think that with feature writing, you tend to have a lot of stories that have a lot of heavy emotion, and you're going into other people's lives with their emotion. I'm wondering how you find a balance between you don't want to get too involved and have that drag down your story, but you also don't want to be callous and distant. So how do you find the balance to make sure you're telling the right story?
Well, we talked about that a lot in class, and it is a balance. You're exactly right. And it's hard, and you have to be mindful of it. When you lose sight of that, then that's where you go off the rails. And I talk a lot in a mentorship role about heart. One of my great mentors, was the late Mike Harden, the columnist at the Columbus Dispatch. I was very fortunate to learn at his hip. I have letters that he's written me hanging all over my home office wall. And he always said, Holly, only heart lasts. That guides me in everything I do. And it doesn't mean I can't be an investigative reporter, and it doesn't mean I can't be a hard-hitting reporter, but it means I never lose sight of the fact that these people are humans. So if I'm telling hard news, you still have to be mindful. And I used the example in there of a triple murderer that I interviewed. And I talked in class about how, his children didn't do anything wrong. So it doesn't mean I have to change the story or alter it in any way, of course, but it means I come at it thinking I don't want to do unnecessary harm. I don't want to be over the top about him. He's evil enough. I don't need to make him into a worse character. So you have to balance it. And I do, I mentioned also in class about how I'm always the reporter. I get teased a lot because I'm the one who's crying. I'm the one standing in the back of the courtroom in tears. I'm the one, pulling out my tissues at the interview, and there's no shame in that game. I think that it's what helps make me better at what I do. But you also have to never lose sight of the reporter relationship. I'm here to tell your story, and we need to remember that. So it is a balance, and it weighs heavy on my mind and the mind of any good journalist.
A lot of your stories are very tragic stories. They're full of emotion. Do you feel like your own emotional stance on it, you just mentioned that you're the reporter that cries in a courtroom. Do you think you're almost capturing your own emotion through writing that story?
That's a great question. And I check myself every day. Again, the principles we're talking about apply in any business, and you should do a gut check every day in whatever you're doing. And my gut check for me, because I am so emotional and because I do wear my heart on my sleeve, if I have a legacy other than being really loudmouthed and annoying, I hope it's that I cared about the human condition. And so in all of those things, I have to, your point is a good one, because I have to make sure I'm not transferring, right, how I feel. So if I'm interviewing you in this tragic situation and I am heartbroken, I'm feeling all of these things, I have to check my gut and make sure, is that what she was saying? And is that what she meant? But being mindful of it allows me to, recognize a problem is the first step to recovery, they say, right? So recognizing how emotional I am helps me maintain that balance, I think. But and reporters, I never want to say, there's always a lot of talk about my emotions and how I do my work. And I never want to imply that reporters who aren't crying in the courtroom care less about the families, or reporters who don't, act this way at a tragedy care less. We all show it differently, but we all feel the same pain. We just approach it differently, and I just don't hide it. That's the difference.
Getting maybe just a tad off track here, but you get a chance, I know, at the Dispatch to see a lot of Lantern writers come over and be an intern. So I'm wondering, maybe just in general, what you see for young journalists, maybe as some of the strengths and weaknesses and, common things that they need to work on.
I get off track all the time, so we might as well get off track here. I'm famous for running off the rails. And I'm happy to talk about that because we are ever expanding our support of and our relationship with the journalism program here at Ohio State, and we're happy about that. We see so much talent coming out of here, and we're excited about that. But there are definitely things. I spend so much time with young journalists that there are patterns and themes that I see just across the business, and that is, and this makes me sound like the old woman I am, but I think it's not a journalist issue. It's a generational issue in that we have to be aware of the fact that we are not entitled. And I see it in this business. I'm sure that people saw it. Well, I know people saw it in me when I was a young journalist. I thought I was all that. I was going to take this world by storm, and I was terrible, right? I was awful. And it took people saying, just back the bus up a little bit here. You do this and this and this first. And I think the world has gotten so competitive and so fast that you all feel pressure that I never felt, that even my son in his mid-20s didn't feel. 18, 19-year-old journalists or anybody is feeling this pressure that we're judged by our immediate success, right? And that in some people's minds might mean, I don't want to work a 4 to midnight Sunday night cop shift covering Columbus homicides. I got stuff to do. Well, you know what? No, you don't. Your stuff to do is cover the 4 to midnight homicide shift for the Columbus Dispatch. And again, that's just overall. I think we're putting so much pressure on people to shoot right to the top. And I would caution people to ask yourself, well, what is the top? What is success? If I'm the best cops reporter, 4 to midnight cops reporter this paper's ever seen, I'd say that's pretty good. But what is valuable is a desire to get better every day. We tell our interns when we hire them, we want you better when you leave at the end of 12 weeks than when you came. Now, what that looks like is up to you. You decide, what you want to get better at, and we're here to help you. And we'll guide you along the way. We want you to get better. So we want a desire to get better, a desire to learn. We want, I think it's important that journalists recognize their role today and be willing to tune out all the noise about all the distractions, about how people supposedly view us and feel about us as the media, in quotation marks, whatever that means, and focus on what you want to do and covering the news and good storytelling. So we need people to be able to, we're looking for journalists who can hone in on that and know what they want and do it.
So you talked about blocking out all the noise, and I remember when you came into our class last year, you talked about having a happy pile. And I was wondering if you could kind of explain what that is and maybe where it started, because I'll be honest, from that day, I have one now, and
Same.
I've followed it, and it's really nice to have.
Yeah.
Look, I got goosebumps. They can't see it, but I do. Of all the years, because I've been trying to be a good mentor for decades. And of all the things that I do, that's the one that young journalists come back to me 10 years later and say thank you for. That and my Mary Poppins bag, which we can talk about if you want to. But my I don't stink file is I always tell people you should have one no matter what you do for a living. But if you are a journalist, it is a must. It is as critical as your phone, your newspaper, your paper, and your pen. And an I don't stink file is every time someone says something nice about you, somebody sends you an email, great story, good job getting that A today. Hey, you looked nice in the performance in the band last night, or what have you. Anytime somebody sends you a handwritten note, which people still do, people send you a note. Thanks for listening to me. Thanks for doing the story. Thanks for this. Performance evaluations at work, teacher recommendation letters. Put them in a file and just keep it on your desk. And on your dark days, the days where you are trying to write a story and you think, I'm a fraud. I've been faking this for years and I can't string 5 words together in a sentence. And they will come. Those days will come. Or the days when you get 100 emails on a story and they're all telling you, and this is a true story for me, that you should be drawn and quartered at dawn in the middle of the public square for your treason. When that happens, you just turn your chair around and you just randomly pull a piece of paper out of your I don't stink file and you read it and you think, you know what? I'm not a very bad human after all. And I think it is so important. And I have 2. I have one in my home office and I have one in my office. And I believe it 100% that everyone should have one.
Moving back a little to what we talked about earlier. Yeah, that's wonderful.
I love the I don't stink file.
Yeah, me too. We were talking about how you said that the title of your talk earlier, the big thing is don't be a jerk. Do you feel like to be a good reporter, or possibly even just a good features reporter, but I think a good reporter, you have to be a good person? You mentioned how you're capturing emotion and you're really feeling for these people, and do you feel like actually caring, which most people would consider a trait of a good person, do you think actually being a good person is important to being a good reporter?
I do, because I think we should all just be good humans, right? We should get up every morning thinking, how can I be better than I was yesterday? Now, I do that and I fail, and every night when I go to bed I think, well, that was a flop. But yes, I think we should strive to not be a jerk. And this is the part where my friends always laugh because they're like, she's a jerk, right? But I think you should strive to not be a jerk and to be a decent human being. And that translates into making you a better reporter. We talked in class about being a reporter, interviewing people and talking to them is all about making a connection. Why would anyone make a connection with me and tell me anything if I'm a jerk? So this gets confused sometimes. Because again, I've been labeled over the years a features reporter, and that's what I like to do, and it's what I think I'm good at. But I can take down a government just as like anybody else. I've done those stories in my career. The awards that mean nothing that hang on our walls. One of my that I'm most proud of is an Associated Press annual investigative reporter award from my prior job before the Dispatch. I can do those things, and I don't mean that. Not being a jerk doesn't mean that you hold the powerful accountable, and it doesn't mean that you uncover injustice, and it doesn't mean that you don't stand your ground and make people follow public records laws and make politicians answer questions and be held accountable. What it means is the kind of anecdote that we talked about in class, and I think I mentioned earlier. The mayor who embezzled $1 million from the city, well, his neighbor didn't do anything wrong. And his 6th grade daughter, who has to go to school every day in disgrace, didn't know her dad was stealing from the city. And so by being mindful of those things, even when you're taking down governments and even when you're, holding the powerful accountable, you can make sure that you're not being unnecessarily harmful. Just like doctors, journalists, the code of ethics is that you do no harm. So by taking down the mayor who broke the law, you're doing exactly what the Constitution has protected us to do. But if you intentionally hurt his family by not weighing, does this detail matter? Does putting his daughter's name in the story, does that help or hurt? Is she a part of the story? And asking yourself those questions. I think that's a difference. And I hope that comes across, because sometimes I think people think that by not being a jerk means that we can't be bulldog reporters. And I can tell you, I can be both, and so can every journalist I know. It's about asking yourself questions and going back to that gut check we were talking about. But by and large, for what I do, it really does mean just letting people see that I'm human, and that I'm genuinely interested in you. I talk about. Can I tell one more? Can I tell
go
a story?
ahead.
So a lot of times in class we talk about. I mentioned the sewer story earlier, and I always talk about how you can't make sewer sexy. And it speaks to your question about young journalists. Every story can't be, a front page Sunday centerpiece winner. And somebody has to write about the fact that the city of Marysville a few years ago was building a new $20 million sewer plant or what have you. That's not an interesting story. Even on my worst day, that is not going to be an interesting story. So, but it's news. That's a lot of money. And neighbors aren't going to like the smell, and you have to do it. So the story I always tell about that is that guy whose job it is to spend every minute of his day over the anaerobic digesters where the sewage is roiling around, and he has to make sure it's doing its job and not stinking more than it should, and that the little amoebas or whatever they are doing their job. He's interesting. That dude wants to do that job. He knows sewage, right? Like, he goes home and talks about how your stuff stays out of the water, right? And so if you go in thinking, why does this guy want to work in a sewer plant? And what is so interesting about it? And knowing that your 4 hours that he can tell you everything you've ever wanted to know about a sewer plant is the most exciting 4 hours that man has had in weeks, because nobody ever wants to hear him talk about sewage. That's not being a jerk. That's just recognizing that people are giving you their story and the time of day, and you find some connection with him. You have something. There's a reason that what he does is interesting. Find it and listen to him. And by the time I left there, I'm like, this is something, man, that they can keep this out of my water. This is it's still not a sexy story, but that dude knew his stuff. So I think it's how you look at things, how you look at the opportunities.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Student Slant. Check in next week for more student perspective.